Hello, and welcome to Blythe Coffee Break, the podcast where queer culture, pop chaos, mythology, and a very strong cup of coffee all meet at the same table. I'm Jemma Blythe, your resident cultural overthinker, media romantic, and professional noticer of all things that are definitely not that deep until they absolutely are. Each episode will spill the hottest queer headlines, unpack the stories shaping how we love, live, and see ourselves on screen. And because we're nothing if not a little dramatic, trace those moments back to the myths and archetypes we've been rewriting for centuries. Think of this as your midweek catch-up with a friend who reads too much into TV storylines, quotes folklore at inappropriate times, and believes that queer media isn't just entertainment, it's cultural history in real time. So, grab your drink of choice, get comfortable, and let's take a little coffee break the Blythe way. Welcome back to this week's episode of Blythe Coffee Break, Season 2, Episode 4. So, before we begin, we have a main topic this week of the pop culture obsession with witches, and queer-coded feminine power. So if you are into all things empowerment, girl power, things like that, this is the episode for you. And as always, we have to start with a coffee order. And this week's coffee order is actually one that I've put forward, which is quite odd. It's a white chocolate mocha with, I think, 3 shots of coffee. Could be wrong. But yeah, white chocolate mocha with 3 shots of coffee. I love it. That nice sweet blend of white chocolate meets coffee. Delightful. Try it if you want to. But I will leave it up on the screen. And that comes from my @LifeWithJemmaBlythe Instagram account. So that will also be up on the screen. And I'll include everything in the description anyway, like I normally do. But let's get started, shall we? I mean, it's hot sip time, isn't it? Cheers! So, let's start with something that's quietly taken over the internet culture, which is witches. And I'm talking witchcore aesthetics, tarot readings on TikTok, cottagecore meets dark femininity. It's everywhere at the moment, or at least it is on my feeds. I don't know what your feeds are like. Maybe you could share your feeds down in the comments. But interestingly, a lot of people that are drawn to this kind of aesthetic are queer women. So over the years, there's been Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the famous storyline between Willow and Tara. And that actually played out in 2000. So, and I think that really set the tone when it came to queer relationships being seen on screen. And it really established queer relationships on screen, which is so good when you think about that, to take place in the year 2000. That's amazing. And then, of course, you've got the American Horror Story, which I wasn't familiar with until I did research for this episode. And now I want to know more. And so you've got Misty Day, who is an asexual character. That's again something new. I mean, I've seen asexual characters played out in Heartstopper, but I haven't seen asexual characters in anything else that I can think of. So the fact that it's actually been brought up in American Horror Story is brilliant. Then you've got Quentin Fleming, who is a gay warlock. Behold Chablis, who is another gay warlock in Apocalypse, another series of American Horror Story. So in just that one series, you've got 3 characters that are queer, which is brilliant. It really is. I love it. Because it adds, as well as it adding more to the story, it also adds more complexity to the characters and improves the dynamics on screen. And all of a sudden you get people wanting to ask questions about different characters and people see themselves on screen. I think that is really crucial, that now people can actually see people that they relate to on screen. Then again, you've got The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which you've got the transition storyline, which is beautiful. And Theo transitions from non-binary to a trans man, and he gets support from his friends and a pivotal coming out scene with his father. That's amazing. At one time, I can remember watching programs, and at one time, there would not have been any of this. And so even like the supernatural programs have broadened out and added more depth to their characters, added more diversity to their character verse within the show. And that's just amazing. Because there's so many people that watch these programs, and the conversations that will be happening now behind closed doors that wouldn't have otherwise happened. Isn't that amazing? I mean, we talk a lot about representation, but yeah, I wish a lot of this had been around when I came out. I really do, because this would have saved a lot, honestly, a lot. So, as normal, I went down the TikTok rabbit hole for this episode, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, there was at the Witch Bloodlines on TikTok, they put together a video on 10 signs you're a natural witch. And I love that. At one time, no, it has always intrigued me. But the fact now people are using social media again to create community and reach out to others that are maybe interested in the same things. It's amazing. So I love things like that. And then somebody else called Ash and Rose had done Self-Care Sunday with low energy rituals. Now, that sounds like a self-care Sunday that I would love to be a part of. I'm not going to lie. But when it says like low energy rituals, I'm thinking journaling, I'm thinking tarot cards. What's everybody else thinking about this? But yeah, it's just amazing how this has taken off. And then I went across to Instagram, and there was Alvine Green, which was kind of cozy aesthetics, dark lights with candles mixed on the shelves. And she called it her church, which I love. Like, that was her peace and sense of self, and a sense of that she could be herself in that room that she'd put together. Amazing. Then there was the Woodland Witch, which, as you would expect, was a natural woodland feel with plenty of candles. Again, blessings on the walls in canvas. And it was a real cozy vibe. And I can understand Being queer myself, I can understand why people are drawn to this kind of outsider power because, yes, it's unusual, but it's also freeing. There's a sense of there are rules, but they're not really. It encourages you to search for that inner power because everything which is coming from the soul instead of outwards. I love that. I so love that. There's a quiet sense of rebellion there. And then, like, talking about shared experiences, defying social norms. I didn't have a religious upbringing. I was christened, but I kind of wish that I'd been brought up more around this kind of thing because I do have a natural born curiosity and wanting to learn more. And I think it comes from that outsider power and definitely reclaiming power from the social normality structures. And I think it plays into the fact that now we have witches on TV. I've already mentioned Buffy, Charmed, Vampire Diaries, and I think it's good how like witches are being portrayed with feelings now. I mean, can you remember when they were just seen as the villain? Disney movies, books as kids, any like kids films. There was a Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz. That's never going to lose its popularity. But yeah, there was all that kind of good stuff. But since then, we've come full circle almost because now witches are being portrayed with thoughts, with feelings, with proper emotions. And not just that, but they are shown with more humanity and more of a relatability around them than they used to be. So, as I've mentioned, the Wicked Witch of the West, we've gone from that to Elphaba in Wicked, who, if anybody says that they can't relate to her, I think you can if you dig deep enough. I think you can. She was portrayed for being wicked just for the way that she looked. So, yeah, I think you can relate to Elphaba if you just dig and nitpick. And yeah, the Charmed sisters, Willow and Tara, they definitely had feelings. Willow definitely stuck by Buffy through thick and thin, and even when she went bad, Buffy was still there. And then you've got Bonnie in the Vampire Diaries, and you can't get any more human than them, which is really interesting. It's a really, really interesting arc, and it does span from women being outcast. That's where the term witch came from. It was directed at women that were outcast. That brings me on to my Deep Brew segment this week and why queer women have historically been linked with witchcraft. It's so interesting. So I've got a little bit of a question for you. Why were certain women called witches in the first place? Because historically, the name witch wasn't about magic. It was about control. So think about that for a moment. When we talk about control, we think of people that are under one umbrella. And anybody outside of that is normally classed as an outcast, bit of a weirdo, bit of a stranger, sometimes could be portrayed as being a bit dangerous because they're an outcast, so they're not seen as the norm. And that's exactly where the term witch came from. And women were labeled as witches. They were often unmarried, so women that refused to follow society's path even then. Women that were childless, women like today would have difficulty, some women carrying children and conceiving even if they did marry. And so to have that name put on them back then, when they maybe couldn't have children, or maybe it was a choice that they made not to have any children. Seemed hot. And then women who were financially independent. So women who maybe had their own business back then, looked after their own finances, weren't relying on a husband for being there or a partner. So again, they were labeled with witch. And then you've got socially non-conforming. So all of the above, plus not wanting to attend social gatherings and maybe not having that many people around them. So, I mean, I would definitely be classed as a witch. Definitely. Without a doubt. But back then, it was seen as something horrible. It was seen as a negative. So then you go into queerness and suspicion. So while historical records rarely used modern labels, there are different patterns that show women who rejected male relationships, that could even be widowed women who were on their own, women who were living together at the time, and women outside patriarchal systems. So a woman who wasn't living with a man, who didn't have to follow his rules at the time, because she didn't have like a head of the household, as men would have been seen back then. And all these women were targeted by the witch trials. Now, there were 2 witch trials, and 2 of them overlapped as well. So there were the witch trials in England, which went on from 1542 to 1736. Then there were the Salem witch trials, which are probably the more famous ones. They went on from 1692 to 1693. So when you think all those women would have been targeted and hung just for being who they were, not necessarily for being horrible, but because the term witch was seen as something negative and something evil, it was seen as something horrible. The term witch, even though it was a social label used to control the difference between women and between people, women eventually reclaimed that term as a term for power and feminism. And when I'm talking about witches, by the way, I'm talking about all witches, just to clear that up. So I told you that this was deep on empowerment and girl power and all that kind of stuff. It's fab, this episode. I had a ball putting it together. So that takes us onto our myth drop this week. And boy, have I got a myth drop for you. So, mythical witches and feminine power. We have the Circe or the Circe. I will put it up on the screen, hopefully, if it works. And she was known for the mastery of herbs, potions, and transformative magic. Residing on the island of Avia, transforming Odysseus' men into pigs using enchanted drugs. I cannot help but laugh at this. This is brilliant. Okay. This is a woman who has been scorned, is completely independent, and because she is independent, you can imagine, this isn't so far from the truth, that people turned round on her, called her weird, called her strange, and she just had enough. When it came to Odysseus' men, she just transformed them into pigs. That's where that saying came from. Yeah, it's amazing. The fact that even back then, women were seen or starting to be seen as independent, as being able to be themselves, no matter how weird or wonderful people thought they were. Then, of course, you've got my personal favorite, The Morrigan, which I will link in the description below, because she was a raven She used to appear during war, and she became known as a shape-shifting goddess of war and sovereignty, much like Circe. Very powerful, very independent, and a force of nature. And these figures weren't weak. That's what's important here. The figures weren't weak. They were only feared because they couldn't be controlled. And so when we think about women that can't be controlled, is that a bad thing these days? Or do we tend to go around and say, do you know what? She's a girl boss. She's bossing this. Go do a thing. I think we do. So again, it just shows how different things have changed from myth to real life to witches changing from not having emotions to being fully human and fully emotional. And it reframes witches as being powerful rather than deviant. And that's the crucial thing here. That is definitely the crucial thing. Which brings me on to this week's community spill. Now, you may have guessed it. I went through TikTok, I went through Instagram, and I went through Facebook. I went down a queer witch rabbit hole, and I was not disappointed. And the witch identity has also been reclaimed in now knowing what I've just said and how the arcs have developed when it's come to how witches are classed and seen and how women are classed and seen, this isn't a shock because it's using an empowering difference that makes them and allows them to feel powerful, as opposed to feeling oppressed and quite on the edge of society and what society wants them to be. When I was going on this rabbit hole, I also noticed something else because the mental health space isn't that separate from the witch space and the sphere that witchcraft is seen in on such as TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and all the other good things, sometimes good things. And it didn't surprise me to know that people have been using witchcraft as their anchor to spirituality and mindfulness, especially the people that practiced nature witchcraft, which is going outside, noticing what they can see around them, picking up foliage, seeing what they can use for potions and herbal remedies, that kind of thing. And I thought that's not that different from grounding, which is a mental health practice. And a very good technique to have in your back pocket, to be quite honest. So, and again, that does link in with queer life because my gosh, is it hard if you don't practice any kind of mindfulness. And it kind of goes back to what I was talking about last week with the Out Together charity. And again, I'll leave there about the charity and the donation link in the description box below because they are an absolutely amazing charity that encourage befriending and digital inclusion sessions for people that are older, guiding them on benefits and showing them how to use the computer safely to connect with other queer people. But that just shows, again, going back to witchcraft online communities embracing witch symbolism, and they kind of create their own homes, their own spaces online. So then they can meet other people and say, hey, hi, I'm here too. And it's kind of like that all the way through. It comes across as friendly, welcoming, and as though it's non-judgmental, which is just amazing. To see all these people bonded together by a word that would have once been seen as an insult. Witch. And it's seen as something powerful now, something autonomous. That's really quite incredible. Anyway, time to offer Blythe's brood take on all of this. To me, it's not a coincidence that queer women, being one myself, resonate with the witch archetype, because at its core, the witch represents something very specific. A woman who exists outside expectation, a woman who doesn't conform, a woman who chooses her own path. And historically, that kind of woman has always been seen as dangerous. And thinking of the way that I used to be at school, I was seen as that, and I didn't have anybody. So that's probably why I can resonate. And I wonder how many of you can too that are listening or watching at the moment. Which brings me to another point of maybe the witch was never the villain, just a woman who refused to be controlled. Okay, crystal ball time. I was watching an interview very recently with Fern Cotton and Erin Doherty from Adolescence. She was just amazing in that, and she did a marvelous job. Erin Doherty did, portraying a therapist for Owen. No, Owen was his name. I can't remember. The young boy that had been arrested. And she brought up a brilliant point of there not being many films or TV programs being made with accurate portrayals of queer female relationships. And that made me think of something. So putting this podcast episode together, it made me think that if this trend continues and witchcraft continues to gain traction like it has, we could see more women and storytelling being rooted in mythology, folklore, and feminine power, which would mean more witches, more anti-heroines, and more stories that don't ask for permission, which would be pretty darn incredible, would it not? I'd love that. To actually see a film in a cinema and for it to be relatable, yes, and yes, get me there now. So I think, yes, we will see a rise in queer myth-inspired media. More morally complex female characters would be amazing. And the continued reclaiming of outsider identities too. I think we'll see all of those. And with that being said, that is it for Blythe Coffee Break this week. Now, as I keep reminding you, please email in lifewithjemmablythe@gmail.com your coffee orders to there. I will give you a shout out on the next few episodes. And what about those 5-star reviews on... I mean, that would be good. I know you want to leave them. So, yeah, I look forward to reading those. But in the meantime, keep subscribing, keep liking. We've got so much coming up on Blythe Coffee Break. And I will see you next week. Cheers.